Lesson 2.5, Disorders of Metabolism. Where do things go wrong? The goals of this lesson are to introduce students to the two major hormones that regulate glucose homeostasis and to test students' knowledge of metabolism. At the end of the lesson, students should be able to compare and contrast the function of insulin and glucagon in energy metabolism and describe the symptoms, causes, and treatments of some metabolic disorders. We'll achieve these goals through a Socratic discussion and short video clip about insulin and glucagon, and a jigsaw activity about metabolic disorders. To prepare for this lesson, you will need to review the key scientific concepts that will be presented throughout the lesson. They include the functions of insulin and glucagon in blood glucose homeostasis, and metabolism of glucose, amino acids, and fatty acids. You can review the scientific content in the background and reading provided for you in the teacher primer, the teacher manual, and the student workbook. The teacher primer provides in-depth knowledge about the scientific content presented in this lesson. The teacher manual or lesson plan provides a minute-by-minute explanation of the lesson structure, including instructions on how to manage the discussion and the activity. The student workbook provides additional explanations for students. You will need to print out one jigsaw reading and one jigsaw worksheet per student. You will also need to print out one homework worksheet per student. The key points of this lesson's do now are that insulin is a hormone that tells the liver, muscles, and adipose to start storing energy for later. In diabetic patients, the normal insulin messages don't get interpreted, so these patients don't store energy as well. Without normally functioning insulin, blood glucose levels can get dangerously high. The muscle and liver will continue to break down glycogen to glucose, and new glucose will be exported into the blood by the liver. We'll get there by reviewing the homework from lesson 2.4. In this homework, students were asked to predict what metabolic processes were activated after a diabetic person eats a meal. You can review these concepts using the teacher primer and the teacher manual. The key points of this lesson's discussion are that insulin and glucagon work together to create a feedback loop that maintains blood glucose homeostasis. Both insulin and glucagon are created in the pancreas. And type 1 diabetics have a problem making insulin, whereas type 2 diabetics have cells that can't interpret insulin's messages. We'll get there by watching a short video about insulin and glucagon. The video on slide 4 is a good overview of how insulin and glucagon work together to maintain glucose homeostasis, and also provides an overview of both type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Caution, you'll want to review the video before class to ensure that it is at an appropriate level for your students and to make sure that the video plays correctly. For more depth review of the concepts presented here, you can review the teacher primer, teacher manual, and student workbook. The key points of the lesson's activity are that if any step in a metabolic process doesn't work normally, a metabolic disorder can occur. And lifestyle changes like a change in diet or physical activity can help mitigate a metabolic disorder. We'll get there by having students complete a jigsaw in groups. Each student will complete one of 6 jigsaw readings, which allows them to explore a metabolic disorder. The disorders are diabetes, a deficiency in myostatin, a protein that regulates muscle growth, a carbohydrate processing disorder, phenylketonuria, a disorder that prevents the amino acid phenylalanine from being metabolized, a fat processing disorder, and maple syrup urine disease, a disease that occurs when certain amino acids cannot be built into proteins properly. Caution, you will want to review that the jigsaw readings are at an appropriate level for your class. To help students focus on the most important details of the jigsaw, give each student a jigsaw worksheet that has them take notes on those key points, which are the symptoms of the disorder, the metabolic pathway that is affected, how metabolism is altered to yield its symptoms, and the recommended dietary or lifestyle changes. You can review all of this information on the jigsaw worksheet answer key. It has everything organized just as your students will be organizing it. The purpose of this jigsaw is to review and apply the concepts of nutrient metabolism we have been learning throughout Unit 2. An important point on the jigsaw worksheet is the question of how altered metabolism yields the symptoms presented. It is this question that requires students to demonstrate that they understand metabolism. For example, in the carbohydrate processing disorder, the symptoms are weakness and shortness of breath with any physical activity. Students that understand that glucose from the diet or from glycogen stores is the primary energy source for muscles should say that the symptoms are present because those muscles can no longer use glucose. Therefore, the patient becomes fatigued very easily when participating in any physical activity. After students have completed their jigsaw reading and taken notes on it, you will organize a teach back in which students teach each other about the metabolic disorder that they were assigned. All students in the class should fill out the remaining portions of the worksheet during the teach back. The key points of this lesson's wrap-up are that most of these disorders are rare because they are genetic disorders. Genetic disorders are rare because oftentimes both parents have to carry a copy of the mutated gene. Type 2 diabetes is at least partially caused by environmental factors like diet, so entire societies can be afflicted. Avoidance of the nutrient unable to be metabolized can help mitigate a metabolic disorder. We'll get there by reviewing the answers from the activity together. The wrap-up summarizes the activity in 2 questions. Diabetes is far more common than the other diseases in the activity. Why do you think this is? And what is a common treatment for each of the diseases? Why does this treatment work? The key points of this lesson's homework are the functions of the organs in the model of energy homeostasis during fasting, feasting, and exercise, and the functions of these organs may change due to diseases and disorders, diets, or fasting. We'll get there by having students review the model of energy homeostasis that has been used throughout Unit 2. Students can use a worksheet as a summary for the content that they have learned over the past 3 lessons. After completing the table on the first page of the worksheet, students are asked how the functions of organs shift to maintain glucose homeostasis in diabetes during a carbohydrate-free diet and if someone were to fast for over a week. Caution, this is a challenging homework assignment because it is asking students to summarize a lot of content. You may want to give your students extra time to complete this assignment and treat it more as a Unit 2 final project. This lesson is fairly straightforward. A question that students may ask is why many of the treatments for these disorders requires an injection rather than an oral medication. The answer is that insulin and the other enzymes discussed are all proteins. If taken orally, these proteins would be digested in the stomach and small intestine just like proteins in our diet. Currently, the best way to deliver a protein to our blood is via an injection, though some pharmaceutical companies are attempting to develop special coatings that prevent digestion of the protein-based therapeutics so that patients can take a pill rather than giving themselves an injection. At the end of this lesson, students should be able to explain where energy is stored after a meal, explain how energy comes out of storage during exercise or times of fasting, and apply metabolism to real-life scenarios. This lesson tests students' understanding of the content learned in the previous lessons of Unit 2. We learn about diabetes again in more detail in lessons 3.6 and 3.7. So if your students have more questions about what causes diabetes, you may want to hold off on spending a lot of time on the subject until then. Don't forget that if you have any questions, concerns, or feedback to let us know. You can contact any of the CTSE team members and we will be happy to help.